Welcome to Elementary, Monday evenings at 6. Today you're going to be delighted for my guest. You've seen my guest before, and I'm sure you're going to find this topic extremely interesting and informative. So my guest is going to ask me to join any moment now.
Hi.
Hi there. Oh, you're
Jason?
sideways.
The other way?
Yeah.
How see, I never know how to use the phone for, let me see.
There you go.
Is this normal?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
good. So we're normal now. All right, good. Hi.
Hi, how are you, Laura?
Very see, that's what happens when I have it here. Okay, hopefully it's not gonna happen again, that it's gonna move. Okay. But if it does, I'm gonna fall back off and I'm gonna come back on.
No
But
worries.
okay, so maybe I'll just do it this way. Okay.
Perfect.
They should definitely find a feature to use your computer, because the phone you have to position it in a perfect way.
Yeah, and hopefully Instagram will start to introduce that. I think few people are getting that feature. I don't have it yet, but a few people are probably going to get that feature added very shortly. But without further ado, let's get started. Introduce yourself and your Instagram handle.
So I'm Laura Tarcia. My Instagram handle is Family Mediation Group. So that's the name that I go by for the Instagram, for the family mediation practice that we have.
Perfect. And so, as most of you who've seen the show before know that I've interviewed Laura once before. It's a hot show, and you're going to love what she brings and what she shares with you today. So tell us a bit about family mediation.
Sure. So family mediation is becoming more and more popular. So it is actually it's becoming very popular, especially for the past decade or so. And in the last 5 years or so, we've had a lot of families gravitating towards that route to separate, essentially to go through their separation in a more amicable, more cost-efficient, and time efficient way. So instead of going to court or through litigation, they choose to resolve their separation issues through mediation. So through family mediation. So in a nutshell, it's a process. It's an alternative process that families can use for separating and resolving their post-separation sort of plans that they have and they want to put in place for them and their children.
Yeah, perfect.
This angle is driving me a little bit nuts. I feel like I have no neck, but I'll find my neck. Sorry.
I hear you. So how does family mediation approach family mediation, should I say? How do you approach family mediation in your organization?
So we always work as a team. We've employed what's called a co-mediation model. So instead of having one mediator at the table, we have created a process whereby we have two mediators, generally with different complementary backgrounds, that come together as part of the team to help support the family navigate through separation and divorce. So they generally have, our process is a little bit unique in that sense, that we do bring generally the complementary skills we have at the table for the families are either mental health, law, and of course financial. So pretty much, the umbrella of the needs that they would need to be addressed during this transition. So we do have, in that sense, it's a little bit of a unique model. Hopefully some other family mediators will employ it, because it's quite effective in terms of helping families move forward.
Yeah, and without the conflict too, with the child's best interest in mind, I guess.
Of course. And the mental piece and the emotional piece is very, very important in the mediation, right? Because it's not, or in a separation, right? Because it's really, it's not a legal issue, right? The way that we look at it, we don't see it from a legal lens. We do see it from an emotional lens that certainly will affect all parties involved, including the children, as they move through, right? So we do need to have at the table that understanding and that support to adequately be, moving through with them.
Yeah, and unpack that a little bit. I know you mentioned you have other supports, you have mental health, and you have financial. So, give us a little more detail, a little more insight as to how typically one of your sessions would be, right? What depth do you go into, and what do you hope to achieve at the end of it?
Okay. So we always hope to achieve what the family needs to achieve. So we will be guided by their needs when they move forward. So each family is unique, even though some may say, well, it's family mediation, is divorce, the same thing applies to all. That is not true at all. Every single family is unique. The way that they deal with separation and divorce is very, very different than, the other family. So what we make sure that a mediation process always starts with an intake, meaning that it's an individual intake. So with each party individually, we have a conversation with one parent or one party, then we have the other conversation with the other party, and then we come together. Now that intake is very, very important, because that intake allows for the mediator, allows us to gain a little bit of an insight into what are some of the issues and how they've been able to manage, and how they want things to be managed. How do they envision moving forward through the separation? What is their ultimate goal? Is it the goal to have a parenting plan? Is it the goal to have a financial division that it's a little bit different than the legal model? Is it the goal to understand the law and then have a little bit of a different conversation? So what are the goals are being established by the parties individually after that intake session? And then after the intake, we bring the parties together. When we bring the parties together, as you can imagine, some of the goals may change, and some of the dialogue may be very different than one would have expected. So we have to also be prepared to navigate those tensions and that discomfort in the joint mediation session, because families do, and parents act differently. Parents act differently when they're on their own, and we all act differently depending on the context, right? So when we have a one-on-one meeting with a parent, it's very different than when we have a two meeting, right? So if they're both together, right? And how their languages sort of interact. So we have to make sure that we manage those conversations effectively, and we also, for lack of better words, we become translators between the two of them if there's differences in languages. After the first mediation session, we have sometimes we have a second mediation session, depends on what they need to achieve, whether it's financial, whether, sometimes they need to sell a home, sometimes they need to buy the other one out of the home, right? So those elements do add a layer of complexity. So we need to make sure that we have a couple of meetings to help them navigate accordingly. So after that, the final product would be what's called a separation agreement. So essentially, that's what they're working towards in mediation. It's their separation agreement. Did that answer in a very long-winded way?
No, it's good. It's good. It's nice to know the details. How do you manage the balance, giving each party equal time or adequate time, or even how do you balance, you know, the powers during the session?
So it's a very, very good question. It's a very powerful question, and it's never a there's never a straight answer. It depends. So the way that we look at it, the power imbalance is not necessarily a negative component of the mediation. There's always going to be a power imbalance. There's always going to be a different way that families or parties in a marriage understand certain things, and that in itself is an imbalance. For example, you know, someone is more sophisticated in the financial area and the other one is not. That's an imbalance, but that doesn't mean it's a negative component of it. We understand it, and then we try and figure out a way to bring the other person as close as possible to understanding, you know, what the financials are, right? If the financial is if there's a financial imbalance. Now, of course, there is imbalance that is a negative imbalance. So there is abuse, there's domestic violence, there are components that are part of a relationship that certainly will bring about a lot of need to manage those much more differently. So for example, if we have a family, so this is when we find out during the intake, we find the individual intakes, we find out whether there is a power imbalance, whether it's manageable, whether it's not manageable, and if it's not managed, or if it's manageable, how do we manage it? So if we have, for example, a family who's struggling, was experiencing domestic violence or financial control or emotional abuse, also, you know, some if there's any mental illnesses, mental health concerns, and medication treatments that they need to be adhering to, we have to find ways to structure the mediation in a way that corrects or remedies or manages those imbalances. So when we have, for example, a family who is, let's say, you know, fearful of the other person, how they may react, how they may behave after or during the mediation, we have to make sure that we structure the mediation in a way that, you know, they have a cool-off period, right? They don't mediate in the same space, including virtual space, right? I mean, there is a huge advantage that this virtual era has allowed us to bring at the table, meaning that they don't have to be in the same home or in the same office, right? They don't have to see each other in the parking lot before or after, right? So these are very important elements that can be structured in the mediation, and boundaries and guidelines that we establish before the mediation and during the mediation, right? So when we look for power imbalances and when we look to manage, it's an ongoing job. So we never stop monitoring for power imbalances. We always monitor. So, you know, through the mediation, post-mediation, and then we check in when we start again the mediation, we check in after, right? To make sure that it's a healthy process, and to make sure that if there is a concern that something may go a direction that it's unwanted, unpleasant, we correct that as best as possible.
Yeah, there's lots of moving pieces, isn't there? Especially when there's kids involved, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us, what are the advantages? I mean, I kind of know what they are, but, you know, share with us some of the advantages of using what you offer.
So the mediation?
Yes.
I think the mediation has advantages for many families, especially in terms of trying to find, if you're a family, the way that we look at families, and I know that some may see differently, the way that our team looks at families is that you're always going to be a family. Regardless of divorce, you're always going to be a family. You're just going to look a little bit different. For your children, you're always going to be mom. For your children, or dad and dad, mom and mom. So you are going to be your unit is going to look a little bit different, but those are going to continue to be your roles for the rest of your lives. Fortunately, we have plenty of research that has demonstrated over and over again that court and litigation has only escalated conflict, has only created damage to families, especially to children. And when that relationship is at risk, then the well-being and the adjustment and the future of the children is at risk. So what we're hoping to achieve too is not only to say to families, you know, oh, it's faster, it's less expensive, because those are true, but also it puts the onus on trying to reestablish a relationship, reestablish that now we're no longer in a romantic relationship, marriage-like relationship, but we're now entering into a co-parenting relationship. And that co-parenting relationship needs to be established, and needs to be structured in a way that will allow for the two of them to work as a team as well as possible. Nobody says they have to be best friends. Nobody says they have to, you know, parents have to like each other, but they have to put the focus, and there is a way to put the focus, despite their dislikes of each other, to put the focus on a healthy relationship that will demonstrate and will protect their children's well-being. So I think that is a huge advantage that you can never find in court. Once you go to court, once you enter in litigation, that opportunity is completely erased, right? So there is no way that it doesn't belong in there, right? Courts are not meant to parent or to establish parenting plans, right? They are following the rules of law. They have no interest or understanding of the parenting and the dynamics, right? So it's not a parenting enhancement process, the litigation. Mediation is, right? So that's how we see the one of the main advantages is to try and figure out a way to structure that relationship to last.
Can you give us, can you walk us through a typical process that you follow? I know you've mentioned about the intake, but just walk us through a typical process.
Okay, so it starts with the intake, and then after that, we always prep the families. So we prep them in terms of what stuff they need to work on. So a separation agreement, which is their main document that they're working towards, deals with two big components. One is the financial component. What are we doing with the money? What are we doing with the assets, with the debts, with the home, with cottage, if there's cottage? How are we dividing these assets and debts? And then the second component, when their children are involved, it deals with the children and the relationship and the co-parenting and communication. So what we do, we start with the intake, and then after that we prepare the families. We usually start with the financials, because the financials will allow for clarity. For families where they're standing, what type of realistic options they're on the table, right? Given their financial circumstances, given their financial puzzle, right? How can we rearrange the puzzle to make sure that it fits, you know, their short-term and long-term goals? And then, of course, we prep them with the financial information that they need to bring at the table. We walk them through what the legal model says. We walk them through the financial statements. We walk them through, options that are available. And then we also, of course, listen to some of the options that they have come up with, or what their vision is. Sometimes their vision is completely wackadoodle. So we have to have a reality check, right? And that's okay too, because that's what the mediation is offering, right? So it's offering them the opportunity to realize that, well, there's not enough money to go around, you know, to still buy the home, to still keep the cottage, to still do, you know, certain things. So let's go back to the drawing board and create different options. So it's a lot of brainstorming, which is really, it's really good. It's really creative, and it allows for the families to really sit at the table and try and figure out a way of how they can rearrange this puzzle to fit their family. Then we talk about children. We also prep them with everything that has to do with parenting. So we send in advance of the mediation session. We generally send in advance some guidelines, some research that it's out there, right? So most up-to-date research, depending on their ages and stages of development. And we have a frank conversation where we move into the mediation about what they're envisioning, what parenting is, what a joint, decision-making is, what's a parenting schedule, what's a child support, right? Because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what a child support is and things like that. So we walk them through all of these elements, and then after the first mediation session, everything comes into their emails. So the beauty of the virtual space we find ourselves in. So they finish, everything comes into their emails, including, you know, any financials that have been drafted, everything that has the, for example, options that have been generated. So they have the opportunity to have either to sit with that information, right? Nobody's pressured to make a decision during the mediation, and we share that with families all the time. This is all just generating, you know, a bunch of options. Let's see if something, you know, sticks and if something makes sense. Everything comes into the email at the end. Then they can have a conversation either with a family lawyer if they want legal advice, which we always recommend, because that's just, you know, another lens, another pair of eyes just for them there alone, for their interests. Or they have to have a conversation with a mortgage broker or a real estate. They would have to have a conversation with a financial specialist, depending on what their portfolio and their financial picture looks like. And then they can come back and say, hey, you know what, we're okay with option B. Can we start drafting the agreement and review it? Or they can come back sometimes and they say, you know what, none of these options work based on the information I got from, you know, I can't buy the other person out of the house. And as we know, as you know better than me, that there has been this very, very erratic market, right, which has had our families for the past year and a half completely in very different zones of creating options, right? Because an option that it may have been available to them 2 years ago or a year before, because of the interest rates, it's no longer available, right? So such a buyout or things like that. So those are now eliminated. You know, their hopes or their dreams about a property, for example, are now erased, right? So or we have to go back and come up with a different option. But that's really what it is in a nutshell. A day in a mediation would be from the intake, prep them, have a conversation about the big heading. So we walk them through. And then, you know, they either are comfortable with some of the decisions and with the options, and we start drafting the agreement, or we continue to generate, which, you know, hopefully can lead us to an agreement.
So what if someone has
this? So I hope you reserved at least 5.5 hours, right?
Yeah. So, what if someone has a lawyer in the process already? You know,
yeah.
Does that lawyer then join your session or allow the parties to go through the session and then kind of step in at a later time? Like, how does that normally work?
We love lawyers at the table. We do. So there are, and you know, it's very, very important that families do have a, in our view, especially if they're going to participate in a collaborative negotiation, in a collaborative like process, that they're also collaborative. That doesn't mean, you know, they allow the other person to walk all over their client, but they are collaborative in nature, and they understand the mediation process, and they're there in the best interest of their client, which sometimes is the best interest of the family, right, collectively. Yes. So yes, there is a mandate of the lawyer to represent the best interest of his or her client. However, in a mediation collaborative sort of sphere, they also have to look at the bigger picture, because the family will continue as a family moving forward, right? So certain elements need to be a little bit a different lens than legal needs to be applied. However, we encourage families to have lawyers, depending on how their lawyers are in terms of their collaborative nature. Sometimes we have families who have to be in separate spaces. So if they bring their lawyers in, sometimes we have to do what's called a shuttle mediation, meaning that we would walk in between two virtual spaces. One client would be there with his lawyer or her lawyer, while the other one would be there with their lawyer, and then we would walk back and forth. Now, that's sometimes to that type of shuttle mediation allows still for a productive conversation, but then also it allows for sometimes a party who feels a little bit more vulnerable or cannot speak for themselves, allows for that sort of safe space that they are, you know, they're there with their lawyer and they're supported adequately. So when that happens, that is another power imbalance, for example, right? So which can be remedied by saying, have legal advice. Bring your lawyer at the table, or have a letter of opinion written by a lawyer, of your interest and of your obligations, and then we can work with that. What I like about that is that it takes the heat off of the person. So for example, mom and dad, dad, mom, they're arguing over, I don't know, spousal support, let's say. So if they're arguing over spousal support, and spousal support is a tough one. It's a very, very tough one. It's very subjective, and it produces a lot of tension sometimes. Now, what I like about having the legal advice is that it allows for more options, right? So there's, we can generate some options, that lawyer can generate some other options, and we hope that there's a middle ground somewhere. We hope that we're starting to generate some ranges and some options that are getting closer to bring the parties together, right? So it does offer an extra opportunity to get options, realistic options at the table. So I like that. I like when lawyers come in. What it does sometimes also do, which is very important, it takes the heat off of that person. So if I am perceived to be, let's say, I don't know, greedy by my partner because I'm asking for whatever amount of money, then for lack of better words, I can just blame it on my lawyer. I can say, well, my lawyer has suggested, that's their opinion based on their, that's their advice, is to go with that. So this way, I know I sound facetious, but this way it takes the heat off of me in that situation, right? So it still kind of preserves a level of collaboration with my partner, because now it's not really me, so it doesn't increase the tension there. But it also protects my rights, right? To make sure that I do ask. And I'm not afraid to ask because of unpleasant consequences. I'm not afraid to ask for what I want, right? So because that's the risk that we want to avoid. We don't want families or partners in the mediation to be afraid to say what they want because of fear of unpleasant consequences. That is why we always encourage them, if there is a moment, if there is a time when they feel like their voices are no longer at the table, when they feel that they're afraid to say what they really want to say, we also have during the mediation, which again it's very cool that we can do that. We also have our screen, a separate screen open with the email open. So we encourage families, if there is a moment that they feel that, they need to take a break, they need to be in separate spaces, something is happening, to email us, right? So then this way we are on top of managing this. Because the last thing we want is for families to enter into a contract, into an agreement based on fear or of unpleasant consequences. If that and when that happens, then they're going to resent that agreement, and it's not going to last the test of time, right? That agreement is going to collapse in 6 or 9 months from when we're drafting it, and it's not worth it. It's not worth their time. It's not worth their money, right? So we're trying to make sure that we create an environment that allows for families, whether it's with legal advice, whether it's financial advice, whether it's in different rooms, right? That they still are feeling that their voice has been at the table, and their interests have been fairly represented in the mediation, in the process, and balanced.
Yes. I think the world of you.
That. I'm joking.
Yeah. I think the world of you. I mean, this is a very emotional process, right?
Very.
For those of you who don't know, Laura and myself actually met many, many years ago. We actually, did a class together. We did our course together, and she did family mediation and I did labor mediation. And, the family mediation, I always take my hat off because there's so much emotion involved, right? But I know you do such good work helping families really kind of turn their minds towards really coming up with an agreement and, looking at the best interest of, especially when kids are involved. Yeah. So how often do you see, mediation resulting like in a mutual agreement, like coming out with an agreement at the end of it?
90, 99%, 98%.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Very,
yeah.
yeah.
Because one of the things that we also have to, I think families need to know when they know about mediation is not suitable for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another goal of the intake, is to determine whether is this going to work, is this going to go completely, we're going to waste time and money for everybody involved, right? So if you have two parents who are completely polar opposites, who are angry, who are at each other, and there is absolutely no common ground, it's pretty, you can pretty much assess it in the intake, and you don't proceed with the mediation. Of course, there are mediators out there who probably will proceed. We don't proceed with the mediation. We actually encourage them to do mediation arbitration or lawyer-led negotiation. So there are other processes that they can delve into that will bring some form of closure, because we don't want to start something that we know and we already have a sense that it's going to fail. So and those are rare that we draw right from the onset. So right after the intake, we say this is not appropriate, but this are some of the processes. So those are rare ones. And then when we delve into the mediation, generally about 98-99%, they do come to an agreement, which is good for them. I mean, that's not necessarily the goal that they all have to come to an agreement, right? Some have different goals, but they do come to an agreement at a very high rate.
See, I mean, I know we both do mediation in different fields, and I tell people in my field that mediation is always, you're always left, with control, right? Like, you have control over the process. I'm wondering, can you hear me? Because I think you're frozen. Oh no. You might have to sign out and come back in. I'm so sorry. We're having some technical difficulties. But I'm sure she'll be right back. So just give us a minute. It was a very good topic, don't you think? Do you have any questions if she comes back? I definitely, encourage people who know friends or family, or they may be going through some difficult times and they need to follow a process. This process can save you so much time and money, of course, because our court system is so broken. And I mean, it takes forever to get a tenant out of a property. I don't know how long it takes to get in front with a court date for these things. They're even longer. So I'm not quite sure. There she goes. She's back. So give us a minute.
It worked.
There we go.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries. It happens. Sometimes, we have technical difficulties and we just have to work through it.
Yes. No, I liked your point, the control. The control point is huge, because you lose control, right? The further you go from the mediation or collaborative, the less control you will have in making decisions. Absolutely. That's a huge point.
Yeah. And it's not a cookie cutter, even though it could be a cookie cutter. It's still, flexible enough so that it's covering the basis of what you need in the agreement, right? So this might, this next question, I'm sure is, a ticking time bomb. But what are some of the challenges you see, in this area with the court system? And, just what are some of the challenges?
So challenges in the system, or with the families in the mediation?
No, just with the system. Just
with the system. Well, the system is designed to take care of the system. So the system is not necessarily a family-friendly environment, or adequately taking care of the needs of the families, right? The families, when they're going through a separation and divorce, we've always advocated that what they need is the court is the last resort. So however, as a society, we still seem to be pushed to believe that you have to go to court, you have to get a lawyer involved, you have to, you know, do litigation before you get to an agreement, and that is very far from the truth. So what is with the system is we do not have adequate resources anywhere in the communities, right? So everything that we have are pretty much in the court system. We have a family law information session program that it is in the court system. That's great. However, you know, that in itself directs people to court, right? So it really is almost counterintuitive that you're doing an information session and you are teaching the families about how not to go to court, but the venue itself, it's in the court. So they have to actually walk in the court. And then in the communities, we don't have enough resources for families to learn about how to separate, to learn what the steps are, to learn you know, what are some of the elements that would lead, you know, one to experience domestic violence, abuse, financial control, emotional abuse. There is no knowledge that is imparted at the ground level, at, you know, meeting people where they're at, right? So which actually pushed me years ago to start this nonprofit that I've been running for, you know, since 2014 or so, that delivers information sessions into the libraries. So in the libraries, because libraries are venues where people feel fairly safe to go in and be seen going in, right? So if somebody, for example, is fearing that, you know, their husband or their wife may punish them for going to court to ask questions or for going to a lawyer, then, you know, the library is a pretty safe space to come in and, you know, and have information sessions, which we have been running for years now. Rain, shine, COVID, not COVID, pandemic, not pandemic. We've been running it virtually, so we've been keeping those up. But it is unfortunate because those should be at every corner, essentially. I like the Australian model. The Australian model actually has this sort of family law, family relations offices in every community, right? So if you are going to separate or divorce, you first go into your community at one of these, you know, offices that have mental health support, emotional, like psychological support, things like that, things that actually family need, right, in order to you know, take the next steps in the healthiest way, right? Because that's going to spill in the health of the community, right? Without having that support for families who are experience a traumatic event, right? We're not having those supports, and you're sending them to court. You're sending them in a process where, you know, and research is telling you it's only going to escalate conflict. It's only going to lead to deleterious, you know, consequences to families. You're sending them there. You're almost, I mean, there is no option, no choice really for these families to gain the knowledge that they should have had before that, so they don't have to end up in situations where they not only going to damage their own relationships, but also their communities at large, right? Because it's going to spill into your neighbors, it's going to spill into your cousins, your friends, right? I mean, those things don't stay in a silo. They don't stay just in your home or in the with the person who is experiencing that trauma. It's going to spill in the community, and the way that you address it, it's going to be reflected in the health of your community, right? If you give them support in the community, it's going to have a chance to have a healthy outcome for the kids, for the family, and for the cousins, and, you know, to demonstrate to others that, you know, this can be a healthy blended family. This can be, you know, a family where infidelity happened, but we're going to move forward, right? I mean, so because there are mechanisms, right, to put in place from a psychological and an emotional and psychosocial lens, not a legal lens. Legal lens has nothing to do with this, right, with this phenomenon. So I can I can talk forever about the system, but hopefully the system is catching up. Part of the hopes that we have seen reflected in the law that has changed. The Divorce Act has changed recently and has changed the language. So the language right now, instead of having the word custody, now it's called a decision making, which always meant decision making. So custody has been replaced because it had a negative connotation. Access has changed to parenting time, which is much more human because you don't get access to your child, right? You're a parent, regardless of how much time you spent with your child. That is parenting time, right? It's not access, it's not visitation. You don't visit your child, right? So these things have been taken out, that have been replaced. However, as we all know, I mean, it takes years for the government and the system to change a comma. So that's those changes are going to come slowly, but you can apply them in a mediation forum, right? You can apply those changes. You can take control over those changes in a collaborative space, right? So the system can do whatever the system wants to do. You just have to be aware that you can do better as a family, right? As a relationship, and choose that way. It's just, how do we impart this information? And part of it is through people like you, through channels like you, through through advocating. This is how you're actually going to hopefully we get the message. You get the message to families who may need to advise their friends or their other acquaintances about the next steps.
Me, I'm all about mediation. I feel like it leaves you, like I said, having the control. Whether it's whether you come out at the other end with either way, you've had a way in making that decision, right? So I'm a big proponent of it. Plus the time, the money, and just courts can really lead to a little bit of negative space because you're really but this allows people to talk about stuff, to find a way to deal with it. And I think the most important at the end of the day comes down to the children, right? Making sure the kids are still not affected negatively by all the noise. So in saying that, where can, what have I missed? Because I want to share your story, and I encourage everyone to share this, because the more people turn their minds towards mediation, I think the better place they'll be in. So what else can you tell people that I may have missed before we wrap up?
I don't think you missed anything. I think the most important thing is that families do get a message that there is another option. And no matter how vulnerable some families feel, or some individuals in a family feel, and they say, there's no way, I need my rights to be protected, there's no way I can collaborate with this narcissistic personality, or this or that. The reality is that you can. There are ways, there are mechanisms. So you have to trust the process. You have to trust you have to trust your mediator, right? So that's why I always ask. I tell people all the time, just call around, right? If you had a conversation with me, find out about what the process is. Find out, tell us what are your concerns, so we can see how we can navigate or mitigate some of those. And then another way is call around, call a couple more. Understand their approach, understand their, see their vibe, right? Sometimes you don't click with everybody, and that's okay. Understand what you get at the end, right? You do want a separation agreement at the end, because that's your contract essentially. So make sure that you do financial disclosure. Those are huge things, right? That family mediators really need to be on board with, ensuring that families do get adequate access to this information, right? What they do ultimately with their financial division, it's up to them. However, they have to be informed. They have to know what the legal model is, right? So the information is power. So they have to understand what the financial division looks like, and then they can make an informed decision. But needless to say, it's important to call around. It's important to ask the mediators what's their approach, and it's also important to make sure that you tell the mediator what are some of your concerns about the mediation process, because they may be completely irrelevant, right? Like somebody may feel, you know, concerned about something that doesn't even have a room in mediation, right? So there, you don't have to worry about that much, right? So there are a few things that families can take control of right from the onset to make sure they're on board for a process that makes sense to them and their family. They don't have to stick with the first mediator they find, right? Like, just give a couple of calls.
No, that's great. So where can people find you? Where can they reach out, and where can they find you and connect with you?
They can find me on either Instagram, or the website is familymediationgroup.ca. So there's an email there, or, you know, they can call 647-284-9148. That's my direct line. I do pick it up. And if I don't, I do call back. And there's an email as well. My personal email is fmglaura@gmail.com, so they can directly, you know, reach out to me. Listen, you know what? We've been doing lectures in libraries for many, many years about that. So families sometimes feel reluctant to ask questions because, you know, time, or they feel like they have to make a commitment, or they feel like they have to go with you. That is not the case. I think the more questions you ask, for us, we think, what's one more, you know, after all these lectures we've been doing, what's one more question, or one more person wanting to find out information, right? So part of our advocacy has always been also informing families, and sometimes informing families that we may not be the right fit for them, right? And that's okay. Yeah. They still should be asking the questions, and they should not feel reluctant to call a couple mediators, or to address their concerns.
No, amazing. I mean, you do some good work. If you ever need any help with your your not-for-profit, you know, just holler, and I'm happy to help out anytime. And of course, and I'm happy to bring some resources and you know, channel some people to help out, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to help each other, and we're here to you know, I mean, watch each other grow, right? Like, I mean, I think the work you do is spectacular. I've said it before, and yeah, and I think a lot of people can you know, really kind of learn from it and grow from it by using mediation, especially your kind, because you do bring so many resources to the table, which is so amazing. So I want to thank you for your time. I know I took so much time today, and
thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And for all of you watching, thank you so much for staying with us. I know it exceeded our time on the show, but I so appreciate you watching. It makes a world of difference. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jacqueline Watson, and I'm a realtor with Sutton Group Tower. I do this Monday evenings at 6. And if you know a friend who's struggling, needs some help, you know, please get in touch with Laura at Family Mediation Group. Thank you again, and until next time.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
I can't wait until next time. Yes.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye.